Well, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn for Leaders and those who want to be. I'm super excited about our gathering today. Of course, we meet every Thursday on Zoom, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about current leadership issues, what might be challenges that you're currently experiencing, or just on a topic that's going to help us be a better leader. And from time to time, I like to bring in a guest. And so I'm super excited to have Keith Willis here with us today. Keith and I met through another introduction and we hit it off, and I was like, man, this guy, he's got it. He knows what it is about being a great leader. And so I invited him to come and be a part of our gathering today. Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
Jill, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So Keith, just so that people get to know a little bit more about you before we start talking, tell me and tell us, what's your background?
I own a company, Core Management Training, focused on leadership development training, primarily in the life sciences arena. I started my career in the Army, did ROTC, all that other good stuff. I was a captain when I got out, and then promptly got into the pharmaceutical industry. Worked for several different companies, worked at Ciba-Geigy initially in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and basically moved from west to east after Ciba downsized, ended up at J&J in the Toledo area where I was a sales rep, hospital rep, and then went into the home office in the basically in the New Jersey area where I did sales training. And then I was a district sales manager for about 6 years. And then from there, I went over to Wyeth where I did account management training. And then I was a director of field operations for one of the zone VPs. Went back into training after we were bought by Pfizer, and I did vaccines training for a couple of years. And then from there, went over to Otska, where I had opportunity to build out leadership capabilities and leadership development department for that company. They were taking on responsibility for a multi-billion-dollar drug at that time. It was the most written product in industry, and because they were taking over responsibility for their own drug, we had to build out infrastructure. And then from there, I went over to Bristol Myers Squibb, where I ran one of the training teams with about 70 managers, 700 sales representatives. So between being in the military as well as my time in pharma, I've seen a lot of different things when it comes to the leadership.
Yeah, good and bad, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and just jump right in. And I'm going to ask the question, what has been your biggest obstacle and how did you overcome it on your leadership journey?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges that I've had, and I think a lot of leaders have, is around managing yourself.
Mhm.
There are a whole constellation of things that go along with that. I think of it as part of it's emotional intelligence, how you're being seen. Are you being not only being an authentic leader, but also are you acting in a way that's the most appropriate? I remember one time my wife had told me that she would never want to work for me. So
Ooh,
when your spouse tells you that, that gets your attention. So
sure.
I look back on my journey. There are things that I did when I was in the military that, they just were not, they just were not good. And so you kind of think about that journey. I mean, I think one of the fortunate things, at least in pharmaceuticals, there's always been a lot of training. And so learning how to do certain types of things. So there are certain leadership things that I did well, innovation, doing things differently, some cases, being one-on-one, those type of things. But I think as you begin to mature, as you get older and reflect upon your behaviors and things that get in the way of being the most effective leader, they can really make a big difference. So for me, that was probably, I would probably say, the biggest obstacle. And I think a lot of people have that obstacle because in your mind, you're doing all the right things. So as a sales manager, you live and die by the numbers. Well,
Sure.
you got to be the one that's calm, cool, and collected, even though you may feel that anxiety. So people pick up on your anxiety. They pick up on the challenges and issues that you have. And so your team becomes a reflection of you. So building those type of skill sets, you become more effective at being able to manage people more effectively. So over the
Yeah.
years, I was able to do that. I do know one tool that helped me out significantly was embracing strength finders.
Yeah.
I'd always been, I've been part of it's my personality, could be overly critical, but
Yeah.
beginning to understand how to manage people from a strengths perspective really made all the difference in the world. Now, I wish I could tell you that I read Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham, so that was the book kind of turned the corner. But I wouldn't say that it was all of a sudden. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, those are some good concepts. Started to apply them, and I think that's the other thing. A lot of times in your leadership journey, there's kind of a trial and error part of that, and you try some things and then you get away from it and then you try it again. So you have to keep on trying and keep on growing. So when I became a manager working in the home office within training teams, I found that utilizing strengths really made a big difference. I was able to get people promoted. I turned my training team over twice because of utilizing strengths and really begin to understand who I was and how to utilize my best strengths to get the best out of my people and help them do the same thing. So those are a couple of ways that I overcame one of those obstacles. But I do think that managing yourself is one of those things that's easy to, I don't know if avoid is the right word. I think it's part of it's a level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's also getting feedback and being open to receiving the feedback that you receive, because a lot of times we can get upset when we hear certain things, or lack of acceptance might be a better word. So sometimes you are good at acknowledging it, but not really good at accepting that's the feedback that you received. And there's some skills that you need to be better at.
Yeah. That's so good. Oh, there's so many thoughts and so many ideas in my head. It's so, I was actually just talking with a friend of mine about this morning. Both he and I come from the pastor world and really got into coaching because there was an opportunity. My particular denomination was looking for people who would get certified as coaches so that then they could go out and coach pastors. Well, we got certified. It was phenomenal. We were super excited. And all the pastors were like, we don't want your help. We don't need you. And finding that it's kind of the same thing now. Like, as I'm building a coaching business, going out and meeting with people and finding out what's going on with their company, they're like, oh yeah, what you're doing, it's so important, but they then don't engage and don't want the service because what I think is there's this fear that they're going to discover that they're the problem. And I just want to tell them, I was like, I think I'm going to work on figuring out how to include this in the conversation. You are the problem. You are the problem. Have the self-awareness to recognize you are the problem and you can grow. So self-awareness and having that growth mindset is so important.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. How are you finding that you're able to take your knowledge of the importance of self-awareness and then bring that to the leaders and the people that you're working with today?
I think part of it is being in their shoes. When you talk to clients and potential clients, it's letting them know that you're in the same journey. A lot of times in the pharmaceutical industry, somebody runs leadership development. So you've had some of the same conversations, issues, don't necessarily have a proverbial seat at the table. Some of the same challenges. So I think when I can be in somebody else's shoes, it gives them a level of confidence that we can kind of overcome that. And sometimes, they're in a position where they're working with people at different levels. So oftentimes in training roles, training can be the glue within an organization. People don't oftentimes see it that way. Sometimes they see themselves as order takers. And so it's trying to help them figure out, how do I begin to navigate through, the network, the internal networks, the external networks to do the things that need to be done.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about how self-awareness made you become a better leader. Coming from a military background, and I know that there's been a lot of change in the military, but still there's a lot of top-down leadership methodology in the military. And so you obviously learned how to invest in yourself as a leader, and then how to invest in others. What else did you do as far as, developing that self-awareness and then taking the information to become a better leader?
So I guess I would start with a couple of things, because I think at times when we talk about the military, to some degree, it is a misnomer that it is top down. It is and it isn't. It's not
Okay.
that much different than corporate in some ways. The best leaders that I encountered were those that use their influence, not necessarily their authority. If you
Mm,
had to use your authority, then you really weren't being a good leader. So a lot of times you're working within a team. I mean, my first platoon I had, I don't know, 70, I think 70 soldiers. You have 4 or 5 squad leaders. You have a platoon sergeant. Unfortunately, the lieutenant's the dumbest one in the unit because you've been on active duty a hot second. So you have to learn how to listen, get people's opinions and those type of things. So really starts early, that lesson, and then watching senior leaders, how and when to defer, really listen to the people that are in your command. So that had been my experience. And then I think one of the things that the military does extremely well is, in corporate America or even in business generally, you get promoted and there's no training. You just, hey, you're in charge, you're the manager. Well, I went to six 6 months of officer basic course before I went to my first unit. And then, mind you, there were 3 or 4 years of ROTC where I went to camp. There were evaluations, assessments. So you learn how to be, an officer. And same thing,
mm,
those that go to West Point, every summer there's an engagement or something where they're learning how to lead. So it's not like you throw somebody in and then all of a sudden they're learning how to lead. It's constant training. I was joking with somebody the other day and I said, fortunately, the military doesn't treat training like corporate does, because if it did, we would be we'd be in extreme trouble. And so, I began to learn there that leaders read, and are well educated. And then, fortunately, I joined the industry. And pharma has its critics and those type of things, but generally you get a lot of training. So a lot of training around soft skills, social styles, DISC, emotional intelligence, crucial conversations, coaching and feedback, how to interview. I mean, the list goes on. And
sure.
so you're surrounded by a lot of very intelligent, very bright people. And invariably the conversation comes up, what are you reading? So as a consequence of that, that's how you begin to develop a level of self-awareness. And then the other part of that is that it's not necessarily, and even if you move from company to company, you get a coaching workshop. And then, I like to think of a bundle. So crucial conversations, that's advanced coaching. You have some other elements that, you can add emotional intelligence, you can add resilience. All of those things help you be able to have different conversations or tough conversations with people. So become a lot more aware of people's responses to you, and it becomes more about them and not you. One of the lessons I learned is my role as a manager, or my role as a leader, is to make you the best version of you. So,
Yes.
if you're able to do that, then you're going to be a lot more effective, because if everybody on my team was just like me, we would be in a world of hurt. There's just some skills that I just don't have. And so you try to build a team that has a lot of those skill sets and brings a lot of things to the table, a lot of different ideals. And that's when we get into those discussions about diversity and things like that. Though that's why those types of things are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, that's what leadership is bringing out the best in the people that you lead, not because you were the best at doing the job that they're doing.
Yeah, and sometimes you're managing people that are doing jobs that didn't even exist. So, you think about Drucker and you think about, his concept around knowledge workers. You can't, I mean, I know we talk a lot about leading by doing and leading by example. I think there are some things that you can do, but I think there are also some things that inherently you have people on your team, you've never done their job, and you're never going to be an expert in doing their job. But there is a
Yeah,
way to coach them, be able to provide them with feedback and help them in a way that they can impact the business in a positive way.
sure. Yeah. Uh, we talked about feedback a few weeks ago, and we started with the fact that it's feedback when I give it, it's criticism when you give it to me. Yeah. How important, what is like, how do you set up your team and the people that you're training to be good leaders? How do you set them up to receive feedback in a positive way?
um, I think for starters, you got to do early and often. I was doing a course on psychological safety, going through a trainer, so on and so forth. And somebody had come up with a statistic 5 to 1, 5 positive to 1. I know Manager Tools, which is a podcast that does a lot of stuff around management. I think there were 7 to 1. So at the end of the day, you should be given feedback a lot, and it's
Sure.
not hard to do. In Manager Tools, they have a comment that if you ask the question, can I give you some feedback? And somebody has that look on your face like, oh crap, then you're not giving enough feedback, because
Right.
mostly it should be positive. And then when you begin to give feedback, people will be looking for feedback. I mean, all you're doing is impacting people's behavior, and the behavior is what that's their performance over time. So if you're not
Right.
providing any feedback at all, you have no impact on their performance. And
Yeah.
and so, managers get confused between the difference between coaching and feedback. I mean, feedback really does not take that long, and it's not rocket science. It's just feedback. And most of the time it's positive. It's like you give a presentation. Hey, you did a really good job. Here are the things that you did well. You think you might be able to change this and this because, the impact that it had on the audience or whatever that is. And you can be walking down the hall and give feedback. It's people
Right.
make it a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's just feedback.
Well, it became for a while, it became such a formalized thing. Like, oh, we've got to sit down. We only give feedback during our one-on-ones, and we schedule those. And it was just so like locked into a box that people lost the natural ability to be able to give feedback.
Yeah, it's like you're working on a project. Um, there are always some elements that you struggle with. It's not any different than having a conversation with your boss about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, and where the hot spots are and where you're frustrated. Have you thought
Yeah.
about X? Have you tried
Yeah.
this? Have you tried that? I mean, that's feedback. I mean, it's not a formal coaching session. All it is, hey, try this instead of that.
Yeah. Well, it's conversation. It's working together.
Exactly.
And so why do we have to define it as being this thing that then becomes processed, that then it loses its impact and becomes just one more thing for somebody to check off a box?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's so good. Um, oh, dang it, I had a question and just totally left my mind. That's the challenge of live recording. Does anybody else have any questions real quick while I'm trying to bring that question back to my mind?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your perspective, Keith. Do you feel like there are any tools that maybe resemble filter of sort that you kind of, I don't know, put in front of the way, like how you give feedback and when you give feedback, that have been really effective for you, like something you learned over time? Like, a good example would be like the sandwich method of, giving a compliment and then your feedback, and then
Yeah, I'm not a sandwich fan.
but something, like that,
Yeah,
so to speak.
I cringe every time I see it in a deck. I do think models are good because they're tools. You only have one tool, you only have one tool. Yeah, more than one tool, you have options. So I would start with that. I think there's a situational leadership. I think they have, that model. I think that model works well. I like the manager tools model because what it does is it presents it in a way that almost just like situational leadership tool, but the difference is that you ask if you can give somebody some feedback because sometimes it may not be the right time, so on and so forth. And if you create a culture of feedback, it gets to be simpler. And if most of the time that you're giving feedback, if you start with positive feedback, then people are going to begin to ask. And so if you create that environment, then it becomes easier. When people don't give feedback, then it becomes a big deal. And I think that's the challenge, is to really focus on that. And the same thing with coaching. I think coaching models are good because it's a model. The models vary, they're not that much different, but beginning to start with a model, because the easy coaching is easy. Where it becomes really important is when you need to have those important conversations. Doing things like the other part of that is when you do things like one-on-ones, staff meetings, and those type of things. The reason that you do a one-on-one is not really for the update. It's to build a professional relationship, because at some point you're going to have a conversation. I won't say goes south, but you need to move somebody in a different direction. And so in some cases that could be career changing. I remember somebody that was on my team, they were from another country. And so in their country, their culture was it's in your face. And so when they would engage with people, if they were getting in the way of a project, so on and so forth, it would be this conflict. And it would be conflict that was not seen in a positive way. And so having that conversation was an important conversation, but being able to have a model and starting as a starting point, because it was a crucial conversation. So I'd probably use some crucial conversation pieces. I use some other pieces from other models that I had learned, and you put all of those things together. It didn't change the fact that there were tears. And there were some emotional there were some emotional challenges during that conversation. But when people come back later, years later, and thank you for that conversation, then the models work. And that's the beauty of using these type of models as a starting point. And I would even argue that, yes, I don't like the sandwich. But I would say that using a sandwich would be better than not having. Let's say you never given feedback before and you don't know what to do, and you've got a model to rely upon. I think it's a starting point. I think using some tools is better, is most times better than using no tools at all, because it gives you a starting point, and then you learn other stuff that you can add in, and then you can pick and choose. There are coaching models I learned probably 20 years ago where there was this thing called the congruency model, for example. And I pulled that tool out when I was having a problem coaching somebody in, like closing, for example. Look, I know you know how to close. You've been doing sales for 20 years. What's the deal?
Yeah.
And so there was a value issue. But if
Yeah.
I had not learned that model, I would have never asked that question. I would have kept coaching the way that I was coaching. But because I pulled something from, another model and used it, we got to the issue and got to the challenge, and we were able to have a conversation. And it was never a negative conversation, but it was a factual conversation about how do we move you forward. So I think whether you're doing coaching, you're doing feedback, even if you're doing business planning, I think models are great because they're frameworks. And then from there, you can get creative and all that other good stuff.
Yeah. You know,
Thank you.
Patrick Lencioni, he talks about employee engagement. And one of the things that he said there's 3 pieces. And one of the big pieces is that managers know their people, that they're known. And so if I, as a leader, know my people and have a relationship with them, then when I'm giving feedback, it's going to become, it's going to become more conversational, to where you're not like, okay, did I gave a positive, here's the negative, another positive. Like it just flows so naturally out of the conversations that you're having, and it's received better, for one. I mean, there's times where we just have to give what people would call negative feedback. We have to coach people onto being the best version of themselves. You talked about that earlier, that bringing out the best in people. So if we have a relationship with them, they know that we're not doing it to be mean. We're not doing it to be heavy-handed, but we're doing it because we want to see them be successful, because when they're successful, the company is successful.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think that, as a part of that, because in Patrick Lencioni's book, when he talks about that piece there, I think one of the other things that's really telling is the manager, and this is the piece around the leadership piece, I think sometimes that's missing, because it's a great book. And even when you get an Amy Edmondson's piece around psychological safety, at the end of the day, the manager has to have some level of vulnerability, because none of that happens unless the manager signs up for it.
Right.
So it's willing to have the conversation, really get to know people, and for the people to get to know them also.
Right.
One of the lessons I learned, I asked my team, I told my team, I said that I have a tendency to be overly critical. So if you think I'm being overly critical, then you need to raise your hand. You need to tell me that, because it's who I am. It's personality flaw, or whatever you want to call it. And so that opened up the lines of communication, because it was, acknowledgement of, look, I got gaps just like everybody else does.
Right.
Have a real conversation with me about how you're feeling. And so I think those things get to be really important. And I think that's the base leadership that everybody can have, whether you're a leader in that you lead leaders, or you're an individual contributor and a leader in being willing to be vulnerable, to have the conversations that you need to move people, not only to move people forward, but to move yourself forward.
Yeah. Well, Keith, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great. We'll have to definitely have you come back and share some more. Where can people find you?
So yes, you can find me at coremanagementtraining.com. It's exactly how it sounds. If you spell all the words out, so it's literally 2 T's, because when core management ends with a T, and then there's a training. So that's my website, or you can get me at kwillis@coremanagementtraining.com. All
right. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. And thanks everybody for being here. Of course, quick announcement. We will not be meeting next week, because I'm doing a presentation and it's smack in the same time. So next week will be canceled, unfortunately. I don't like to do that, but it couldn't be avoided. But we record these, they're up on YouTube. It's a great opportunity. You can go back and watch maybe some previous episodes, kind of brush up on some of the leadership stuff we've been talking about. If there's ever any way I can be a resource for you, you can reach me at jvaldez@linkconsulting.info. If you go to linkconsulting.info, there will be a pop-up that comes up, and I have a free gift for anybody who goes there. It's a little ebook called Confident Leadership: How to Be a Confident Leader of a Committed Team Providing Stellar Service. And I would love to be able to give that gift to you. And until 2 weeks from now, thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.